Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this live webinar that is being organised as part of the Law Virtual Work Experience programme powered by Springpod. We hope you're enjoying the programme so far and are looking forward to getting stuck in with your quizzes, assignments and activities. So just a couple of housekeeping pointers before we start. This talk should last around 30 to 40 minutes. Please do remember to use the Q&A function to ask our guest questions. He'd love to answer them. But due to the number of questions that usually come through, we may not be able to answer every question. So please use the upvote function if you spot a question that you were going to ask anyway, and we'll be choosing from the top voted answers. And if you do miss this webinar or need to leave halfway through, remember that the webinars will be recorded and they'll be uploaded in your relevant module within about 24 hours. So in today's webinar, we're going to be talking about advocacy and client communication. And joining us here today is Chris Daw QC. But before we start, let's get to know him a little bit better. So Chris, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do? And then please feel free to go into your presentation.
Afternoon, Chloe. No, it's great to join you and great to be part of this event. I speak many student events. They're always really exciting for me to do, and I think we get huge numbers of questions. So my name's Chris Daw QC. You may have guessed that from the somewhat unusual uniform that I'm wearing. Although I have not been in court today. I've been filming for a television documentary about drug legalization, and the producers and directors had me dress up in my court gear for that purpose. So I'm a criminal QC. I've been a criminal barrister for 27 years, and I have a relatively unusual background for a criminal QC, and I went to a very ordinary state comprehensive school in Milton Keynes in the 1980s, and really had no idea about careers or where I wanted to go or what I wanted to do. And I was just very lucky that I ended up going to a really good sixth form college. And I did a careers test at the sixth form college, which was, gave me two options for careers. And one of those was to be an actor, and the other one was to be a barrister. And I had absolutely no idea what barristers did for a living or how it worked. I'd seen, courtroom dramas on television, and I kind of knew that, these things kind of existed on TV, but I didn't realize it was a real job until I took that careers test on the computer. And after that, I went to the Crown Court and sat in the public gallery, as any of the students who are watching this are able to do. Even now, the Crown Courts are open for business. And you can go along, sit in the public gallery, and within a few minutes of arriving, you'll be watching a murder trial or a massive drugs conspiracy trial or a really juicy armed robbery case. And you get to see the barristers wearing all of our kind of gear. And I did that, and I watched some amazing trials. I found it absolutely fascinating. And I was 16, nearly 17 years of age when I first went to watch a case in court. And to be honest with you, Chloe, I just became completely addicted to the whole thing. I just thought, wow, this is amazing. This is a real job. Real people really get to do this for a living. And so from that moment onwards, I've never looked back. And that was, well over 30 years ago. And here we are after going through all of the education. I went on to do my A-levels at college, and then I did a law degree at Manchester University. And then I did the bar exams, which is another year studying at a college in London. And then I basically became a criminal barrister at the age of 23. Shoplifting cases, assault, fairly sort of low-level crime to start with. And then over the years, the cases I was doing got more and more complicated, more and more serious, and to the point where I became a QC in 2013, which, for those of you who don't know, means Queen's Counsel, or some people call it silk, taking silk. And that means that basically I've got to the top of the barrister tree. QCs are the kind of elite group of barristers who do the really juicy cases, the most complicated cases, the most difficult cases. And usually if you read about a big case in the news, a big murder trial or a terrorist case or something like that, you'll guarantee that it will be a QC who will be the main lawyer on the prosecution side and on the defense side. And I, as well as I've sort of given you my whole life history in just a couple of minutes, but I also, as you can see in the background, am a writer, and I wrote a best-selling book called Justice on Trial. And I have something for you here, Chloe, which is the best question is getting this book signed by me with a personal message in the post in the next couple of days. So get your questions in on the Q&A, because you could get a free copy, personalized signed copy of Justice on Trial. I try and speak at schools as much as I can. I often get out to, when in normal times, before all of the things we've been living through, I used to go to school at least every couple of months, 3 months, speaking in state courts, state comprehensives up and down the country. I've got a load of content for anyone who's interested in a legal career. Go to my YouTube channel, Chris Daw QC YouTube channel. You will find at least a dozen videos that tell you how to make job applications, how to succeed in your career, and just all sorts of other really interesting stuff and useful stuff. There's more on there than I've got time to cover in this session. So I'm really excited. I presented television programs for the BBC, but I have to say, doing events like this and speaking to young people who are really excited about the law and about careers, and about advocacy, that's what really turns me on. And I'm happy, Chloe, you know, I will answer any of your questions, and I'll give you anything you want to know. So what would you like to know next?
How about we hear a little bit about, I'm sure it's different every day, but what you do in your sort of day-to-day roles?
Okay, so in my role as a barrister, my job is to basically to go to court a lot of the time doing really complex jury trials. So if I get up in the morning, let's say I'm about to start a big trial, which I am actually next Monday. And what I do is I will make sure I always get to court very early, which is not a bad tip for anyone out there watching. Get there early, and then you don't have to worry that you're ever going to be late. So I always get to court early. I make sure all of my paperwork is arranged the night before, all of my preparation has been done and everything's in order. And then I'll turn up at court. Usually I'll get there about 8:30 before any of the other barristers have arrived. And then what I do is I sit down and I really need to kind of get my head around what's going to happen in court that day. So let's say I'm about to cross-examine a big witness in a murder trial who's identified someone as committing a murder. I'm going to be looking through all of their witness statements very carefully. I'm going to be looking to see whether they've changed their story. I'm going to be looking to see whether there's other evidence that maybe, you know, if someone says that my client was at the scene of a murder at midnight on a Saturday night, I'm looking at whether their mobile phone was used 5 miles away, whether there's some CCTV footage, you know, all that kind of just stuff, and whether there's any kind of DNA or fingerprint evidence that might either support the prosecution or it hopefully will allow me to create a bit of doubt around the case. So it's all about getting under the skin of the case, finding out all the details, and then trying to know the case better than anyone else. Now, you can compare this to doing an exam. If you're going into an exam, the key to it is early preparation. Make sure you do your revision, and when you think you've done enough revision, do a bit more. And that's exactly how I approach my job as a barrister. You can never achieve absolute perfection, but don't ever miss an opportunity to do a little bit more digging, a little bit more work, to get a little bit more detail as to what the case is about. And so a lot of my day then, if once I get into court, you know, it's a very formal environment. You know, the judge is there. We're all wearing our wigs and our gowns. And the jury will come in, and the defendant will usually be sitting in a glass sort of secure dock, a bit like a big glass box at the back of the court. And it's all, as I say, it's all a very solemn environment. It's a very serious, but it's a very dramatic environment too. But once I'm into court, I'm into battle mode. You know, I kind of have to focus, I have to concentrate, and I'm listening to every word of a witness and just waiting to see when that witness is going to make a mistake, when they're going to say one word wrong from what they may have said in their statement. And you know, I'll pick up on that, and I'll immediately be cross-examining them and saying, well, hold on a minute, you've just said this. You just said the car that drove past was yellow and it was on a 19 plate, but actually in your witness statement you said it was red and it was on an 18 plate. You're a liar. So, you know, all of that kind of all of the things that you see on TV, we do a lot of that, but, you know, it is quite dramatic, but also there's a lot of real hard background work. So what you see in the courtroom is the kind of product of many, many hours, sometimes weeks or even months of really hard work, just to kind of make sure that in my head is every detail of the case that they're going to need, because you don't have long to think. Once you stand up in court and you start asking questions, you really don't have much time to think. You need to be very well prepared, have a lot of your questions written down in advance, a lot of the topics you want to cover, and all of your documents in the right place, either on a computer or an iPad nowadays. Usually, very rarely do we have big paper documents anymore. Most of it is electronic, as it is in all walks of life. So high levels of preparation, high levels of concentration, bit of a flair for drama once I get into court and once I get into full battle mode. But you know, it's a serious business and people's lives are on the line.
Yeah, of course. Wow, what an amazing insight. Thank you for all that information. So what would you say are the most challenging parts of your job?
I think the sheer relentless amount of work. So you know, it's because there's no beginning, there's no middle, no end of what I do. So at any one time, I've got anything up to 20 or 30 different cases. and they're at different stages of their kind of development. So some of them might be at the very beginning, and a client may have just become a suspect in a big criminal investigation, and other cases are coming towards trial, or possibly even an appeal, which takes place after a trial if someone's convicted and they want to appeal. So often the life of one of my cases can be from anything from sort of a few months to 5, 6 or 7 years from start to finish. And at any one time, as I say, I've got about 20 or 30 different cases on the go. So the hardest part is really just keeping on top of everything. And so, going back to the tips for sort of students, as it were, organizing yourself, making sure you manage your time well. That's a real challenge for someone like me, because we don't keep office hours. I'm self-employed, so I don't have certain fixed hours of work. I can often find myself working late in the evenings or very early in the mornings, and sometimes whole weekends. So just the fact that there isn't a real natural beginning, middle, and end to my day is a real challenge, because it makes it very hard to sort of plan things, to kind of arrange to do things that may be away from work, because you just never know when a case might go into the court at the last minute for something, or a case that I thought was going to last a month actually lasts 2 months, and what happens to all those other cases I was supposed to do. So it's just keeping on top of the sheer relentless pace of it. And I have to say, it's not that different to the feeling that you get doing your GCSEs or doing your A-levels. You've got all of these subjects, so many exams to do. The key to it all is good time management and organization, and doing work as early as possible. Don't leave it to the last minute.
Yeah, that's great advice, I think. So you said there that earlier that the QC is the highest you can get. So how did you get to that position, and what's it like working up to where you've got to now?
Well, to become a QC, you have to make an application. And for those of you, anyone who's ever filled in an application form, most of them are 2 pages, 4 pages, maybe 6 or so. The QC application form, when you apply, is 64 pages long, a typed application form, 64 pages. Now, most people have never written anything that lasts 64 pages. Obviously, I have, because I've written a book, but most people haven't. And so it's 64 pages. So what's in the 64-page application is really an explanation of why you deserve to be made up to a QC. And the way in which you demonstrate that, and the way in which you build up to it, is you have to be doing the really big, really serious, really complicated cases, and you have to be doing them really well, because the standard to be appointed a QC is excellence. So you have to demonstrate excellence in oral advocacy, written advocacy, leading teams, knowledge of the law, and a whole range of other kind of specialisms or areas of practice that make you a good barrister. So, for 2 or 3 years before the application, all eyes are on you. The judges, when you make the application, you're asking those judges who you've done trials in front of, please, will you give me a reference? And, judges can be difficult, and they are very challenging kind of people. And you have to be absolutely on your game all the time, every day, to get to become a QC. And only 1 in 10 barristers ever becomes a QC. So it's quite a small group in comparison to the whole of all of the barristers around. There are, I think, 16 or 17,000 barristers altogether, and only about 16 or 1700 QCs. So as I say, it's about 1 in 10 of all the barristers in the country. But it's a really intensive process, and it's very challenging. And for several years leading up to that application, it becomes almost dominates your whole life, because you have, every time I go to court or went to court before I applied, I'm thinking to myself, am I going to, if I don't do an amazing job today, this might be the one judge that says, no, he's not quite good enough. So if you can imagine every lesson you go to, or every class that you go to as a student, if every class you had to be perfect for 2 or 3 years, well, it's a bit like that.
Wow. Very intense. That's so interesting to hear the sort of journey you've gone on. So let's switch it up a bit and talk about, why is becoming a good advocate so important?
Well, I think, for a criminal barrister, advocacy is the absolute heart of what we do. So that courtroom appearance, and as I say, jury trials, a cross-examination of witnesses, examining our own witnesses, taking out, if I'm defending in a case, if my client gives evidence, I've got to ask the questions to get the story out in the most convincing and favorable way. And of course, the most famous part of most barristers' work is the closing speech to the jury, where you're really trying to persuade the jury to return the verdict in favor of your client. And if you're defending, you're saying to the jury, that you want them to find your client not guilty. And so oral advocacy, the ability to persuade, because that's all advocacy really is. I think people can, it's easy to make more of it than it is. So the way the advocacy for a barrister, of course, is very public. We do it in the courtroom, and we do it in our speeches and our questions and so on. But advocacy exists across a whole range of activities. You have advocacy in your own life. If young people are trying to persuade their parents to, let them stay out for an extra hour or so, well, the techniques that you use to persuade are often the same sorts of techniques. There's no good just shouting, screaming, and kicking your feet, because that's not going to work. So you have to use you have to find what buttons to press. And when it comes to advocacy with a jury, I've got 12 people sitting in front of me, and I have to persuade them to the side of the story or the version of events that fits my case. But I don't know those 12 people. They're 12 people from every walk of life. I could have an 18-year-old, student, A-level student on the jury, and I could have a 75-year-old retired professor. You just don't know. There could be any mixture of people: bank managers, builders, every walk of life. And so you have to be able to communicate to everybody. I think for me, the most important part of advocacy is the ability to relate to anybody. So it's no good coming at it on a high horse and kind of talking down to people. You have to be able to kind of speak the language that people are going to relate to. Just as you don't talk to a 6-year-old child in the same way as you talk to a 12-year-old or a 20-year-old, you don't talk to a jury in a patronizing way. You always make sure that you communicate with language that people understand and can relate to. And again, I think that's a really important lesson as you go through life. And one of the things that I kind of say to students when I speak to them is, when you go and do interviews, for example, either for a university or for a job, be yourself and kind of think about it a little bit as to how you best present yourself. But what you mustn't ever do is try and be a fake, because if you're a fake, people will see that. So I think being genuine and expressing yourself in a clear and compelling way, clarity of language is so important. The worst thing you can do as an advocate in any situation is use language that's so complicated and so convoluted that nobody understands it and nobody can follow the point that you're trying to make. So I think clarity of expression, simplicity of expression. Most people maybe think that you need to have really super clever long words all the time. You absolutely don't. That's the worst thing to do, because the minute you start using lots of complicated and long words and sentences, people lose track of what you're talking about, and then you've lost the argument.
Yeah, some great advice there. Thank you. And can you tell us what you do to ensure you comply with security and ethics in your job?
Well, that's a really good question. So we have a really strict ethical and professional code for barristers, the code of practice, and there are a whole lot of rules in there as to things you can and can't do. One of the things I think that people perhaps are surprised about, for example, is I'm often asked, well, how do you represent someone if you know they're guilty in a criminal case? How can you do that? And the answer is actually, if a client says I'm guilty and tells me that the client is guilty, then I'm not allowed to represent that client if he or she chooses to plead not guilty. So that's the rule. So if a client confesses the crime to their lawyer, the lawyer can't then carry on and represent them and try and persuade the court that they're not guilty. So we have rules like that kind of protect us from doing things that people might find difficult. If a client says I'm guilty and I want to plead guilty, then of course we can act for them and they'll plead guilty and we try to get them the lightest possible sentence. But there's a whole range of rules that we're not allowed to mislead the court. We're not allowed to make up a client's defense. You'd be amazed how many times clients ask us to. I often have clients in the very first meeting or the second meeting saying, well, Chris, what should my defense be? And I say, well, that's not for me to say, because that's not my job to make up your defense. And indeed, I'm not allowed to. And if I did, I would get struck off and I'd be no longer allowed to practice. So you just, from the beginning, there's a lot of ethical training at the beginning of your career as a barrister, and that gets drummed into you even before you start practice as to the limits of what you can do and what you can't do. And you just have to have those in mind, even when there might be pressures, and there are pressures to try and bend rules from people sometimes. If I get clients saying, will you do this, will you do that? If it's something I can't do from a legal point of view or from an ethical point of view, you just have to say, I can't do it. And even if that costs you, a client, or it costs you a case, I'm afraid that's happened to me. I've had clients that have tried to ask me to do things, and I've said, I can't do that within my professional rules. And they've said, okay, well, I'm going to sack you and get someone else. The answer to that is, that's your choice. but I can't compromise my own integrity for anyone. And I think if you just set clear standards and boundaries, I mean, it's no different to cheating in exams or a whole range of other things that you can't do as a student. If you do those things, you know, the problem is if you get caught, then you're going to pay a price for that, because you'll end up probably not being able to continue in your course, or in my case, you wouldn't be able to continue to practice law. So I think just having good common sense is important. If something feels like it's a bit dodgy, then don't do it.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great insight. Thank you for that great session, Chris. We're going to go to some of the audience Q&As now, if that's okay with you. Cool. So our top question at the moment is, can you recommend some movies, series or books that will be beneficial for law?
Well, you could read my book, Justice on Trial, and I say that in all seriousness, because it's a book that's written. It's intended to make law really interesting and really exciting, and you know, it's got loads of inside stories on you know, my court cases over the years and so on. You can also, you know, again, you can watch my TV show on BBC One, which was called Crime, Are We Tough Enough? And that's still on iPlayer. You can go onto iPlayer and you can watch that. But in terms of a movie that's beneficial, I would say that probably my favorite movie, which I think really kind of sums up what being a passionate defense lawyer is about, is a movie called A Few Good Men, which is a movie about war crimes, and it has Tom Cruise in it, and he plays a lawyer, and he, you know, defense lawyer, and it's just got some brilliant courtroom scenes. It's really dramatic, and I would watch A Few Good Men. And I often watch A Few Good Men when I need a bit of, you know, firing up and a bit of inspiration to go into court and do a great job. I watch Tom Cruise being a good lawyer, and he's, you know, he may not be a real lawyer, but he's pretty good in that movie.
Amazing. So do you find that in movies or TV series that they tend to be true to actually what it's like in court, or do they kind of bend the truth a little bit?
They are completely unrealistic and nothing like real life. No, seriously, I'm not very good at watching legal dramas, because although I'm in the middle of potentially making one myself as producing one, but most of the drama that you see on TV, sadly, is nothing like real life. And that's why I always encourage people to go to court and watch real courtroom cases, whether you're interested in criminal law or civil law, commercial, doesn't matter what it is, family law, you can go along and watch real cases. And what happens in TV dramas is that the TV people, understandably, they've got to fit it into an hour, or they've got to fit it into 40 minutes, or if it's a movie, maybe it's an hour and a half, 2 hours. And the courtroom scenes are so short, it's just 30 seconds here or a couple of minutes there. Of course, the real world of courtrooms is that you're there for 6 hours in a day, and a trial might last for 3 months. Now, TV can't show all of that. It wouldn't be very interesting. So they compress it all. They kind of cut bits of detail out because it would take too long to explain to the audience. So, you know, I'm not giving much away, I hope, but don't base your career choices or anything like that based on what you might have seen on TV. Get out there, find out about real law in the real world. Go and watch real court cases, and go and get some work experience, as much work experience as you can. Get into solicitors' offices, get into barristers' chambers, and just find out for yourself firsthand what it's really like. Because once you've seen the real thing, you'll either love it or you'll hate it. And if you love it, it will be the only thing you want to do.
Amazing, thank you. And moving on to the next question then, how do you deal with an uncooperative or rude client without yourself coming off as rude? It's a great question.
It is a good question. It's about life skills. So I think as I've kind of got more and more experience, you know, bearing in mind, I've sat down in the room with serial killers, rapists, you know, armed robbers, some of the most dangerous psychopaths that we have in our society. And you'd be amazed how many of them are actually very polite. And I tell the story in the book of a man called Tunde Adetorah. I defended him for a mass shooting in which he shot 5 people some years ago. And yet when I sat down with him, he was actually very pleasant, always very polite, and incredibly grateful for all of the things that I did for him. Whereas I've had other clients who are just incredibly rude, and they are aggressive. I don't mean physically aggressive, but they are rude, aggressive, challenging, don't have any respect. And the answer is, I just take a deep breath and I just calmly let them wear themselves out with whatever they need to say. And when they've finished, I calmly explain the reality, the legal reality of the case, the legal reality of their position. If I have a client tell me, there's no way that they can use that evidence against me. And I say, well, actually there is, because legally they can use the evidence against me. And if they shout and scream and kick, I just let them finish their point and then calmly explain the truth. So usually, to diffuse a situation like that, where you have a difficult client, the best method is to let them talk themselves out and then be as calm and patient as you need to be until they have finally taken on board what you've got to say. Getting aggressive back is the worst thing you can do with people in that situation. And I have to say that's another life lesson for pretty much any situation you're in. If someone's being difficult and aggressive, don't confront them, let them work it through. And once it's finished, just be calm and reasonable, and you'll almost always win the day.
Some more great advice for life and for this career. Thank you. So next up, we're going to talk a little bit about university. So is it better to take a law degree straight away at university, or do a degree in another subject like history and then a conversation course or masters?
Yeah, I'll be very frank with you. I'm not a huge fan of master's degrees. I think they're largely a waste of time if you want to be a practicing lawyer. If you want to be an academic lawyer, a professor of law or a lecturer, then they can be very helpful, if not essential. But sort of rewinding back to the topic of which degree to do, I'm sadly, a lot of people have to base this decision on finances, because if you do a law degree, that's the quickest route to becoming a lawyer, because you then don't have to do the conversion course, the GDL as it's called, to convert your history or English or French degree into a law qualification. And many people just can't afford to do that extra year, because I think it costs anything up to 16 to 18,000 just for the fees for the GDL. So, but my kind of overview, setting that issue of money to one side, and everyone's in a different boat as far as that's concerned, but setting that to one side, my argument on degrees is you should do the degree that you are most passionate about, because it's much more important to do well in your degree than to do a law degree. Law degrees are not for everyone. A lot of the content is quite dry and may not be the most interesting. So I did a law degree, as it happens, and that was largely for the financial reasons that I gave you, because I went to a comprehensive school. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and I don't think I would have been able to afford to do a degree and then another conversion degree back then. But kind of one of the things I think about is, I would have loved to have done a French degree or an English degree or a politics degree, because those are things I'm really interested in and passionate about. And so the truth of it is that unless money is the most important factor, and for many people it is, I would say do the degree that you think you're going to succeed at most and that you find the most interesting and you're the most passionate about, and apply that to everything. Apply that to your A-level choices, apply that to your degree choice, and apply that to the type of law that you practice in the end. Because if you don't have passion for it, you won't succeed.
Amazing. Thank you. We'll try and squeeze in one or two more questions really quickly. So how do you build a strong sense of trust between you and your client? Honesty.
You have to be honest with them. The worst thing you can do with a client is give them false hope in a case that is hopeless, or even sort of talk down a positive case just to try and protect yourself and manage their expectations. I am absolutely honest with every client, and they ask me any questions, and even if they get a difficult answer, I still give them an honest answer. So honesty is how you build trust.
Amazing. Great answer. Thank you. And what job would you recommend for an 18-year-old to get in order to support a future career in law?
Something that demonstrates that you have the capacity to work very hard. So it doesn't matter what it is. I had so many jobs as a young person, I worked in a chicken farm, sorting eggs into different sizes. I did countless jobs. I worked on a building site with my dad, and my dad was a builder, and I spent, many weekends and school holidays working really hard. And I've had people applying for scholarships, and I interview for scholarships. And I've had people applying, and I remember one who worked as a barman. He worked like 30, 40 hours a week on top of studying full time. And he's working every weekend until 2 and 3 in the morning in bars and stuff. If I'm interviewing people who want to be lawyers, I want to see evidence that they can work really, really hard, that they are self-sufficient and independent in their mindset. So it doesn't actually matter what it is. What matters is that it demonstrates that you are capable of really hard work, focus, and determination, because those things are really important to becoming a lawyer.
Amazing. Thank you. And we're going to go with one last question, which is, how do you effectively represent a client even when you don't agree with their claim?
Well, that happens all the time in every case. So the truth is, it doesn't matter whether I agree with their claim or their defense, so to speak, or not, because it's not my job to decide whether their claim is right or wrong, or whether they're innocent or guilty in a criminal case. My job in every single case is to take the case in front of me, look at the evidence, and do my best to win. And it doesn't matter what I personally think about it. If it started to matter what I personally thought about it, I couldn't do the job. So you just have to step back from the emotions, step back from your personal feelings, and apply your skills as best you can to the case in front of you. If you do that, you won't go wrong.
Amazing. Thank you, Chris. So that's a close for today's session. There were some great questions in there and some fantastic answers from our guest speaker. We'll sort out the book winner at the end, perhaps. But thank you, Chris, for taking your time out of your busy schedule to join us. And good luck, everyone, with the rest of your programme.
Thanks, Chloe.
Thanks, Chris.